Welcome in, everyone. We'll take a few minutes so everyone has time to enter the webinar. Good morning, everyone, and welcome in. Welcome to our family webinar. My name is Natalie Davis, and I work with U Chicago in the College Programming Office. I'm an assistant director for events and family engagement, and I'm joined here today by Nick, who works with the Office of International Affairs, who has a short presentation for you all throughout this webinar. So thank you all for joining. If you have any questions, this will be posted on our YouTube channel and linked to our orientation website a little bit later. So you can access this material after today's webinar as well. But Nick, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Natalie, and good day to everyone. Thank you for joining. As mentioned, I'm Nick Siemens, the Executive Director in the Office of International Affairs here at the University of Chicago. So, to get us going, I certainly want to just take a moment to welcome you as parents. We're excited to meet your students this fall when they arrive. At the Office of International Affairs, we will be reaching out to your students and meeting with them throughout the pre-orientation or orientation welcome week, and certainly as the quarter gets going. I'm going to talk today a little bit about the role that OIA plays in supporting your student, some important and timely immigration information, some final reminders, and then certainly leave us plenty of time at the end for any questions. So the Office of International Affairs is a central office to the university in that we support international students at the undergraduate level in the college, but also graduate students, certainly PhD students, master students, in all of the different academic programs at the university. Um, our job is to remain current and up to date on current immigration in the United States as it pertains specifically in this case to your student visa, the F or J visa. One of the things that you should know is that, and one of the things we will convey to your student is that if they have questions, we encourage them to reach out to us to ask questions of their academic advisors, career advancement advisors, and others. They can always direct students to us if the question is specific to immigration. But I think in general, these offices are on campus to provide support and information, and that information is best coming from the office, with the expertise. Not necessarily that it's not necessarily the case that there isn't good information online. In AI, we're seeing a lot of that, or hearing from students who have friends at other schools and would like to know um, you know, why they're able to do a thing if they can't do something at the University of Chicago. They're often, small factual experience or small facts, that are different in those situations. Um, and it's important just to remind students that they should be receiving information specific to immigration from the Office of International Affairs. So a little bit more about OIA. As I mentioned, we are dedicated support specific to U.S.-based immigration and supportive programming, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. We have a team that is dedicated to students, but then also a team that is dedicated to international faculty, staff, postdocs, and other academics on employment-based um, visas in the United States. So, as I mentioned, we are charged with just helping students navigate U.S. immigration regulation, and that means from the time that they're admitted and requesting an I-20 or DS-2018 through the visa application process at a U.S. consulate or embassy, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And then certainly while they're in their program, some of the requirements of the visa specific to enrollment, when and where they can, work on or off campus, changes in address, those types of things. Um, the the office assigns advisors to international students on the basis of their school or division. So in this case, there are two advisors who are dedicated to students in the college. Those advisors offer one-on-one appointments, either in person or virtually. Drop-in advising sessions are offered throughout the week, so a student can just pop in via Zoom and speak to their advisor, ask a question. Of course, email, phone, all that works. But we also host a number of virtual workshops throughout the year, pop-up in-person sessions, especially in advance of break periods like winter break or summer break, where a student might need a travel signature, something like that. In collaboration with a number of peer offices on campus, we also offer topical workshops, things, specific to internships or CPT and the related employment authorization. Um, uh, so I will say that most of your students will have likely already interacted with their advisor on the basis of requesting an I-20 or DS-2018. But as mentioned, those advisors will be in touch with students, certainly during the orientation programming coming up here about a month and a half, but also they will be sending out welcome, and introductory emails, just letting students know who they are, how to get in touch, how to communicate with them, when their drop-in advising sessions are, and that kind of thing. I want to talk briefly as we move away from the Office of International Affairs specifically, but talk over the next couple of slides specifically about the current visa acquisition process, what we're hearing, what we know, certainly what your student can expect upon arrival in the United States, and then some information that is specific to just maintaining their status while they are in the U.S. Earlier this summer, the U.S. State Department, which manages the visa issuance process through the various U.S. consulates and embassies, um, announced some additional screening of social media and, students' online presence in general. We know that this process is already stressful and can be kind of intense. It is currently challenging, and we are aware of the fact that it is challenging to secure visa appointments in some countries. Those appointments continue to ebb and flow, and the capacity that is available seems to change daily depending on the location of the consulate or embassy. So we are certainly recommending that students check daily if they're having trouble finding an appointment. Consider, other consulates or embassies in the same country. I think that generally is happening, but it is important for students to be aware of the changes specific to the visa appointments and just that application. Applicants for visas now are being asked to provide their social media handles, their usernames, and set those accounts public. We recognize that is likely kind of an intense change, but we do know that students are navigating this process, having gone through it, and being issued visas. And I think the main point that we have shared with students through pre-arrival or webinars, offered through the Office of International Affairs or in our newsletters to incoming international students, is that consistency is key, that they should be aware of these changes. They're likely reading about these changes or the online presence and social media screening through the visa appointment scheduling process. But it's the goal in this process is to move through it as quickly and painlessly as possible. So ensuring that students are not misrepresenting information or withholding information, making changes at the last minute, just set your accounts to public, provide the information, answer the questions to the best of your ability, obviously, truthfully, but even briefly, and get through the process. For a number of students, as I mentioned, scheduling an appointment is currently challenging. We're aware specifically in India and a number of other countries where um, the the appointment availability has been very challenging to navigate. And what we know is that the State Department, through the consulates and embassies, isn't necessarily announcing when additional appointment availability is or comes online, but we are recommending to students that they check daily. If they have not already, and I assume that many have, completing the DS-160 is the visa application online. So completing and getting that submitted as soon as possible if your student hasn't already is important. And then just following the instructions that are provided at the time of uh, visa appointment scheduling. It's important that students show up with the documentation, not only the I-20 or DS-2019, but all of the additional documentation that is outlined at the time of visa appointment scheduling. Um, One of the things I mentioned earlier, and you'll see it again here, is that consistency is key in immigration. So ensuring that the financial documentation that your student used at the time that they requested an I-20 is the same financial documentation that they are presenting if asked at the visa appointment. Answers to the questions that are listed here, um, are important and just important to practice. Why do you specifically want to study at the University of Chicago? Why the undergraduate program? Why the United States? That kind of thing. I know that those questions can be relative, but it does help for students if they spend some time thinking about answering those questions and doing so again as honestly, but also as briefly as possible. It's not necessarily something that you need to offer more information than is being asked. So once the student is issued a visa, having gone through the I-20 DS-2019 request process, scheduled and attended an appointment, and been issued a visa, at that point, you are ready to make travel plans, or along the way, you will have likely made travel plans. And I just want to comment briefly on the entry and travel planning timelines specific to students who are entering on an F or J visa. On the I-20 or DS-2019 that a student would be issued, the program start date is likely going to indicate September 3rd, 2025. We recognize that that date is earlier than the official start date of classes, which is actually, I believe it's September 28th, not 29th, as listed here. Um, and that is to account for orientation, for the international pre-orientation, if your student's participating in that, or the welcome week at the university. And the F and J regulations allow a student to enter the United States in that status up to 30 days prior to the program start date listed. So for students with a September 3rd, 2025 start date listed on their I-20 or just 2019, they're eligible to arrive in the United States as early as August 4th, 2025, or 30 days before that start date. We expect, and the latest date to arrive generally should be the start date of classes. In this case, I do believe it is September 28th, 2025. So if a student is not issued a visa or for whatever reason is delayed from arriving by that time, by the start date of classes, they should be reaching out to the college, certainly to OIA to talk about what that means specific to maybe starting in the winter quarter, if that's necessary. So that's just some brief information on arrival and entry specific to entering the United States on your student visa. What to expect upon arrival? Generally, students will clear U.S. Customs and passport control um, at the port of entry airport. That could be Chicago O'Hare International Airport. It could be pre-flight clearance in some locations like Dublin and Dubai, for example. Students will actually go through the port of entry inspection in those locations before they board US bound flights. Regardless of where a student enters, they will be asked to present their DS 2019 or I-20, as well as their unexpired passport and valid F or J visa sticker. Um, these documents are going to be required before your student has access to their checked luggage. So we are recommending and instructing students to ensure that their important immigration documents are with them in their carry-on. Generally, they're going to need them on the plane just to complete the actual customs forms. As you all are probably aware, that is something that is generally, done even before landing. It is important that students are printing and signing their I-20 or DS 2019 and carrying it with them with their passport. An electronic copy shown on a phone is not sufficient and could prove to cause a delay upon arrival or through this process. Again, consistency is key. Students could be asked the same questions at port of entry that they were asked at visa application. Why you Chicago? What are you here to do? And again, we recommend that students just be as honest and respectful and brief as possible. So again, having some practice answers to those questions will certainly make this process a little easier. And once again, the goal is to just move through this part of the process as quickly and easily as possible. I want to just note here that the same arrival process and the same information will pertain to students throughout their program at the University of Chicago. So if your student intends to come home over winter break or certainly next summer break to see you, to travel home and see friends, etc., every time they return to the United States, they will go through this process and could be asked the same question, will be asked to present their important immigration documents and passport. So it is important that they figure out a way or develop a method that works for them to ensure that they're not forgetting these documents. Certainly, it would be challenging to board a departing flight without a passport, but you could always forget your I-20 or DS-2019. And we can reissue those documents to students once they've left, but it is important that they're keeping their important immigration documentation in a safe, secure location. We do recommend to them that they maintain those documents also electronically. So having copies of those documents can be helpful, along the way. So once a student has arrived in the United States, the first requirement of their student visa is that they complete an online check-in form with the Office of International Affairs. We ask them to complete this step within 2 weeks of arriving in Chicago specifically. So if they are arriving in the United States but seeing family or friends in other states, it's okay for them to wait until they get to Chicago and then complete this step. The international student check-in process requires that a student provide a copy of their I-94 arrival record. So specific to the prior slide, at the time of entry, U.S. Customs and Border Protection will issue what's called an I-94 arrival record. That will include an arrival number. That arrival record is issued each time a student arrives in the U.S. And attempts to enter in a visa status, in this case F or J. So we do recommend that students collect those I-94 arrival records um, each time they come into the U.S. Um, yeah. So The check-in process again within 2 weeks of arriving, and students will receive reminders to complete this process, along the way. They're getting this information from us already, but I think the other main point is that they are updating their U.S. address in the my.uchicago.edu portal, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. As mentioned, this is a copy or a sample copy of what the I-94 looks like. This is a required document to complete the check-in process, so it is something that they will have to do prior to completing that step. All international students on F or J visas are required to maintain both U.S. and foreign addresses. Those addresses are collected again through the my.uchicago.edu portal. That is your students' portal to basically all things at the University of Chicago. It's where they will register for classes, pay their tuition or housing and housing bills, that kind of thing. All of that happens within my.uchicago.edu. The U.S. and foreign address requirement is something that that can be complicated for students. Just address formatting and ensuring that they are updating their address throughout the 4 years that they are with us here at the University of Chicago is something that is incredibly important. Not only will OIA send reminders, but a number of other offices will also send reminders. And we always appreciate the partnership with our parents to ensure that they are also reminding their students to maintain this information in their U Chicago portal. Quickly, just going to cover a few topics specific to F and J student visa immigration parameters. I think the first here, beyond the check-in, is specific to a topic that we get questions often about. Um, Students on visas uh, are 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 permitted to work so long as they are eligible. And there are differences in terms of whether a student on an F or J visa can work on campus in an on-campus job or off campus, even if that off-campus opportunity is unpaid. We are seeing, some additional scrutiny of students, and students' records, LinkedIn profiles, and that kind of thing. So it's important that students are actually aware of and clear on when and where they can actually work or not. That is certainly something that is important. And again, they'll receive this information from the Office of International Affairs over the course of orientation. We've covered it through our pre-arrival webinars. But I think the main point is that students on visas should not begin working in any capacity without first reaching out to OIA to discuss the opportunity and ensure that, if needed, they have and are eligible for the appropriate authorization. I think, again, the final point, and one that I've mentioned, um, and one that we see often, where students find unpaid opportunities and participate, those things um, can often still require authorization. So something to keep in mind. Always just best practice to check in with your OIA advisor before you make a mistake. Unlawful employment in the United States at this moment is, as I mentioned, highly scrutinized and would be status violation requiring termination of the visa status or sponsorship process, which is something we want to avoid. So I mentioned on-campus employment. This is permitted so long as the student does not work more than 20 hours during the academic year. They may exceed that number during academic breaks like winter or summer break. We do have a fair number of students who find on-campus jobs just for some extra spending money or to gain some experience. There are a number of options, on campus, and your student will learn of those things, certainly through the Office of Career Advancement, as I'm sure aware, but also, may find opportunities through their faculty, their instructors, professors, et cetera, who might be looking for research assistants or that kind of thing. So, um, again, if there are questions, they, are welcome to reach out to OIA. One uh, couple of quick, points just specific to off-campus employment. And I think this typically comes up between years 1 and 2 if students find internships that they're interested in pursuing. They would work with the Office of Career Advancement and OIA to secure the appropriate employment authorization so that they can pursue the off-campus internship. I think it's important, again, and I know I've mentioned this a few times, but any volunteering or unpaid work that is offered to students still might require authorization, and so we do recommend that they reach out and speak to someone before they just accept an opportunity or begin working in that capacity. Every academic quarter of the academic year, and that includes autumn, winter, and spring quarters, international students are required, and all students in the college actually are required to be enrolled full time. What this means is that they are required to be enrolled in at least 3 classes or 300 units. For international students on F or J visas, the Office of International Affairs is required to report that enrollment each quarter. So if your student has under-enrolled, they will hear from us. We will send them reminders to say, you need to be enrolled full time in order to maintain your visa status. If there is an issue that prevents that for some reason, then your student should also be reaching out to OIA, but again, also the academic advisor, just to ensure that everything is clear and that they're aware of what they can and cannot do. So again, enrollment requirement for F and J visa holding students does require full-time enrollment. I want to just move now briefly before we go to questions, if there are any, to speak specifically about some sophisticated scams. I think we're all aware that that scams in general have become more and more sophisticated, and we are hearing from students that they are getting phone calls from individuals who claim to have or may even have personally identifying information, who may threaten or extort students, for money or in exchange, for payment of a penalty, something like that. We do again communicate this to students, but appreciate your partnership as parents in reminding students that if they get a phone call from someone who purports to be a U.S. government official or a government official of their home country, that they are not required to speak to that person, and certainly not if that person is asking them for money. We see this, as I mentioned, specific to immigration or arrest or just violations in general, but it is challenging for students to avoid some of these scams, specifically as they look for maybe off-campus housing opportunities. There are rental scams, that exist. And so just ensuring that if a student feels like something may or may not be legitimate, that they are reaching out to someone at the university who can kind of help them evaluate, what is being presented to determine whether it is legitimate or not. Um, Talk just very briefly about the difference between a Social Security number and an individual tax identification number. Most international students are not eligible for a Social Security number in their first year until they've been in the US for a year, unless they find an on-campus job or at least when they take their internship next summer. That's at a point when they could apply for the Social Security number. Social Security number is not open employment authorization. It is just a tax identification number used by employers to complete tax withholdings in the United States. In the first year, some students will actually be applying for individual tax identification numbers, the ITIN that's listed there. That may not pertain or apply to all students, but certainly for some students who might be receiving scholarships from the university, that kind of thing. And those students will receive information about how to go about applying for the individual tax identification number. If your student has ever been issued a Social Security number, that Social Security number is theirs for life, and they do not need to reapply. They can apply for a new card if needed, but otherwise would not need to apply for a new Social Security number. Uh, Briefly, and I mentioned tax withholdings, but all students in F or J status are required to report to the Internal Revenue Service in the United States. This process typically begins in February each year for the preceding calendar year. So the tax year in the US is January to December. And the tax filing process actually begins in the late winter of the year following. So generally, this information will become available to your students, as I mentioned, in late February, with tax filing deadlines specifically in mid-April. The Office of International Affairs, along with the University Bursar and others on campus, um, offer supportive, workshops and webinars to kind of explain this complicated process. But we at the Office of International Affairs also make some tax preparation software available to students to kind of guide them through the process, similar to any other tax assistance software that you can think of. Sprint Tax will actually guide students through the process, regardless of whether they had any earned income in the preceding year, to help them determine which forms are required, where to send them, and by when. So just in conclusion, I think one point that we often appreciate when speaking or interacting with our parents is just the ability to remind students to keep their important immigration documents, their important documents, full stop, safe. So figuring out a method that works for them to maintain both physical and electronic copies of every single document that they will be issued while they are at the University of Chicago specific to their immigration. Those documents can become helpful to them down the road if they are applying for an H-1B or a green card. So it is important. And again, we will remind them over and over again of this point. The OIA website is a good source of information. That information is updated often, especially as immigration guidance or regulations change. And so it's important that students are aware of that. You, of course, as parents, are welcome to review the information there. We do publish a number of newsletters, one specifically to all international students that goes out monthly. Your students will automatically receive that newsletter, and it will contain, again, updates on immigration, upcoming programs and events, important reminders like maintaining your immigration documents, beware of scams, that kind of thing. We've talked already pretty extensively about scams, but just another reminder here. And then I think, one of the main points, and you all are likely learning this as you go through the summer, but there are a number of campus resources available to your students, all intended to support them in their program and ensure that they have as good of an experience at the University of Chicago as they possibly can. So, if you hear from your student that they're frustrated or they're not getting information, I think it's important to remind them, to reach out. And sometimes that's more challenging than other times. So I mentioned contact and communication already. So all of this information is something that we've covered. So with that, I know that we have a couple of questions, and um, the first is from a student who says, I already have my visa stamp. Do I still need to set my social media accounts to public? So as we understand it, the requirement to set your social media accounts to public is only specific to the visa acquisition process. So if you've gone through that process with the U.S. Consulate or Embassy, you could at this point return your social media accounts to private if that is your preference, certainly. The next question, our son is a U.S. citizen. He was born in the U.S., but we are not U.S. citizens. Is there anything we should take care of specifically? Ravi, I don't think there's anything in particular that you need to be aware of as a U.S. citizen. Your son isn't going to uh, isn't going to be subject to some of the regulatory parameters that we've discussed this morning, specific to someone who is on an F or J visa. And as a result, they should, reach out if they do have questions to their academic advisor or through the college programming office as they arrive on campus and move through that program. The next question, what is the I-20 program start date referred to? So the I-20 program start date, max, is a date that is listed on your I-20. It is referring specifically to the date listed for most students is going to be September 3rd, 2025. So if you look at your I-20, I want to say section 5 is where a series of dates appear. One of those dates is a program start date. Another is the start date of classes or the initial session start date, as well as quarterly information. So that information may show up on page 2, but the I-20 program start date is an important date to keep in mind because it indicates to you when you can arrive in the United States in F1 status. So in this case, if 9/3 or September 3rd is the start date, you could arrive as early as 30 days prior to that date or August 4th, but not later than the start date of classes. So certainly a good thing to be aware of. It appears that we have answered all the questions. I'm going to stop sharing and give folks just a few more minutes. If you have any other questions or anything else comes to mind, please pop it into the question. I will actually put in the chat here my contact information. In the event that you do have follow-up questions, you can certainly reach out to me, and if your student has questions, they can reach out to either Samuel or Angelica, and I can post into the chat just a moment their contact information. Sam and Angelica are advisors assigned specifically to the college, so they can certainly reach out to them. Give me just a moment here. Right. So that is the link to the directory. A couple more questions. If our student comes early for sport training with the varsity team, shall he indicate this early date during the visa appointment or just the normal date? Helen, I think that it is not necessarily something that he needs to indicate. It would just be the normal date. He would arrive, again, potentially as early as August 4th, which is coming up quickly. So that shouldn't be an issue. It generally has not, historically been an issue and not necessarily something he needs to confirm or clarify. But it's a good question. Students are not necessarily reporting or required to report their date of travel at the time of visa application, or even, at the time that they check in with the airline and travel to the United States. Next question. Sunayan says, what would be the process to get a bank account? We are coming from India and reaching the US on September 17th. There are a number of banks locally in Chicago, obviously. And, as an international student on a visa, there may be some additional information that they require where a student may not have a social security number in the United States. But they will be required to present their original documentation, potentially even for photocopying, like their passport, I-20 or DS-2019. They will need at that point their campus address, which presumably they will have certainly by September 17th. Um, and that process generally goes fairly smoothly. I will say there are a number of international banks in Chicago, and even near to the university, Citibank being one, and a number of others. So it is something to consider if you have a bank that may have branches, or presence in the U.S. You might reach out to them locally to find out if that is the case and what might be the best um, the best plan moving forward in terms of opening an account. But generally, that goes fairly smoothly. The university has a credit union on campus called the Maroon Credit Union, and those folks are generally very helpful and aware of interacting and working with international students. So yeah, good questions. I popped in the chat a link to the directory, and if you look at that page, you'll see second paragraph up at the top, the Student Services Team directory, and you can pull that up and see both Samuel and Angelica Casares' contact information, the dates currently that they have proposed for drop-in advising, and the like. I will also just pop into the chat for anyone who is interested, information on subscribing to the OIA newsletters. As parents, you're more than welcome to subscribe to the student newsletter. We may be updating the subscriber list once the academic year starts, and so you might see messages to resubscribe after a certain date, but certainly something that you can or that you have access to at this point. Another question from Sally. Do you know what is required to get a US cell phone? A campus address, yes, is going to be required. The provider, whether it's AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, there are a number of providers. That information will likely also be shared just through orientation and the pre-orientation as well. They may even have cell phone providers, coming to campus. I'm not entirely sure, but it is a process that generally requires, your identification documentation, especially if you do not have a social security number. And that includes proof of your US address. They may ask for some additional documentation or information, but it's certainly something that all of our students navigate fairly quickly and fairly smoothly once they do arrive on campus. Good question. With that, it looks like questions have wrapped up. I want to thank you all for joining me today. We are very much looking forward to meeting your students, potentially even you. We wish you all a terrific, end of summer, specifically with your students, and look forward, as I mentioned, to meeting them on campus when they arrive. So thank you again. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions, and we will see you soon. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.